I will just return to Ms. Buckley. You were telling us about the whole process in terms of approval of new drugs into Canada's marketplace. And I guess just to finish that conversation, would you make a recommendation that the Pan-Canadian Action Plan on AMR include a need to look very closely at this process and with an eye to expedite it? Would you be in favor of that as a recommendation?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, I think I would. I would also say, though, that another thing that should be included in the AMR action plan is that pull incentive, because it's sort of two separate problems. But I do think that there would be a real value in having a look at the drug approval and reimbursement process with an eye to make it more effective so that Canadians have better access to innovative treatments.
I certainly concur there are two different issues. And now maybe again to you, the pull incentive. I mean, the terms push and pull incentive, basically what they actually mean is money for research and money for commercialization, do they not? And presumably from the federal government. That's what is involved in a pull or a push incentive.
Thanks for that question. So, yeah, so the push incentives would, and those sort of operate at the global level, right? There's a number of international organizations that the Government of Canada supports, CARB-X being one of them, that pool money across the world to try and bring researchers together to develop new antibiotics. Could happen at the academic level, could happen at the company level, but the idea is to drive that initial innovation. On the pull side, it's essentially to, as I mentioned earlier, correct that market failure that sort of exists with the model of something like a novel antibiotic, because there's that stewardship piece built into it, and because you're sort of asking to have access to a treatment that you don't really want to use that often, right? As opposed to a normal medication where it would get approved and be accessible and anybody that needed it would have access to it, right? So in the antibiotic space, it's different because we would want those treatments to be very limited to hospital pharmacists, to the experts, the infectious disease doctors, those who would know when it was appropriate to bring out those treatments to really deal with the cases where the traditional antibiotics wouldn't be available.
Yes, point very well taken in terms of stewardship. Market would be small. We would want it to be small. In terms of those pull incentives, though, has anywhere the UK, Dr. Salama referenced, have they been used as in the form of a loan in some way to the companies involved, to pharmaceutical companies? That after all, pharmaceutical companies do make a great deal of money on other medications. In developing a new antibiotic or antimicrobial, they're obviously going to face, as we've said, a very small market. But in the grand scheme of things, they are very profitable companies. So would it not be reasonable, as is done in federal economic development grants, that it might be in the form of a loan?
I can only speak to the UK model, as Dr. Salama said, is a subscription model, right? So it's essentially a process to guarantee a price based on access. The EU one is slightly different. Again, that hasn't been developed, that hasn't been adopted yet. They're exploring that, and that's sort of a transfer of exclusivity. So again, not necessarily a direct financial contribution, but sort of a recognition of the ability to have longer sort of market access for another treatment in exchange for that. I'm certainly happy to follow up with more details on that and sort of do some exploration about whether or not there would be some value in that. That's certainly not, that hasn't been discussed at this point in terms of what the global pull incentive process would look like. There has been quite a bit of research done on what it would need to look like at the global level to really drive innovation in this space. And so that they've sort of strongly suggested the pull incentive and have, identified what the fair share would be by country based on population size and so on. But I can certainly follow up with more information for you after the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if you have it in writing, you could perhaps send it to the clerk so it can be distributed to the committee. If I may be so bold, because I've been here for so long, there used to be something called Technology Partnerships Canada in the 1990s and in the early 2000s, which was run by the federal government. And it was cancelled by a new administration in 2006. It's never been brought back, but I do know that the person who was the deputy minister at the time that ran it at Industry Canada is now a senator, and I don't know if the committee would like to hear from him, Senator Peter Harder, who might be able to tell us how it worked and whether there is a made-in-Canada model we can go back to, or whether we can just look at other models and find another one. But thank you anyway.